So thank you all for coming to this demonstration with Kim and Aram. I'm just going to briefly introduce our guests who are going to be spending the next 45 minutes demonstrating Jack Trip and other programs with us. So Kim Carballo is a senior lecturer and coordinating opera coach for IU Opera Theater, and also a very active performer and educator. And for those of you who have heard of ROK, Reimagining Opera for Kids, it's a community engagement and education program here in Bloomington that has brought a lot of joy and music to Bloomington schools. And she is actually the founder of that program. She's also part of the team that started Tunaweza Kimuziki, which is a cultural exchange program between Kenya and the US. And actually, they are looking for teachers right now. So if you teach piano, flute, voice, violin, you can commit just 1 hour a week to teaching an online lesson to a student in Kenya, and you can build your resume and share your music with the global community. So if you have any questions about that, please do reach out to Kim. As for Aram, many of you know him already because you probably coached with him or played with him at some point. He's an amazing collaborative artist who has been on the Jacobs School faculty since 2016 in the Chamber Music and Collaborative program. And I think everyone who knows him can attest to how talented and hardworking he is. So these are both very talented, creative, forward-thinking individuals, and we're really lucky to have them here with us today for the next 45 minutes to provide some guidance on the very foreign new world of virtual musical collaboration. So if you have any questions, I'm sure they will come up. Please save them. There will be some time at the end where we can ask questions of Kim and Aram. And so if anything comes up, just type it down or save it so that you can remember it. And yeah, with that, let's get on with the Kim and Aram show.
I think I start, is that right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So here, just 1 second, I'll share part of my screen. And that should look about like that. So, hi guys. So we decided we'll start with a little demo to kind of to show what it actually eventually looks like. At least one of the versions of Kim and my work over the summer resulted in this. So I want to play this. What you're about to see is on top is a portion of my screen, and on the bottom is a portion of Kim's screen. This is us a couple of months ago, turning on a couple of programs, letting those programs connect to each other, and we play about 8 bars of music to demonstrate that it's all in sync. Everything's recorded in real time. The audio is in real time. Nothing's been altered. So here we go. Testing.
Excellent.
Hi, Kim. All right, here we go. Super. So I hope you guys can hear that. That was an arrival point for Kim and I after a period of hardship and learning and understanding, and that was the peak point of like, oh, okay, now we know how to just click a few buttons, type a few things, and connect and perform. I think to get to that point, we need to start from the basics a bit. I think just for everyone to get on the same page. And the first thing to talk about is signal flow, is how I thought I could like mark up this thing as I was talking, but I can't, but it's okay. So how the signal goes from how the sound goes from when it was produced into the microphone into an amplifying device, into a then coming out of a reproduction device, which is then is a speaker. Um, and along that chain, we can place a number of things like a mixer, for example, where the signal goes into a microphone, or a sound gets captured by a microphone, gets sent down a mixing strip, gets manipulated along the way, comes out of the master bus, it goes into the amplifier, and then comes out of a speaker. And then a mixer or something like that. A manipulation device can then allow you to expand on how many capture devices you have. But the main takeaway is that there are a few key components here. Is the one, there are input devices, there are manipulation devices, and there are output devices. And the signal flow that we are looking into, that we're interested in, looks a little bit more like this. So a sound enters and gets captured by the microphone, gets sent through a computer processor, some kind of processing, comes out, goes into the modem, through the internet, to another modem, and then back out another computer and all of that. And so we look at how the sound goes into the computer first. We have several types of devices that work with a computer. We have input devices, anything that basically captures human interaction, human input. That could be a microphone, that's a keyboard and a mouse. These are input devices. It could be a camera, your game controller and all that. And then we have output devices like a monitor, speaker, and output, and a printer. And when you plug these things into a computer, sometimes they automatically get installed, sometimes they automatically work, but it's not always the case. And for that, we need drivers. We need, for a device to work with a computer, we need a driver. And it's not, nowadays, computers just automatically go and do it, but we don't take that for granted. If it's not working, some kind of a communication between a device and a computer is, a driver's in charge of that connection. And once you install driver, once it's all actually connected to the computer, we get access to all that information that is being captured by these things. And you're able to route that information, route the sound that gets captured into wherever you actually need. And we route those things from settings, whether it's the system settings, general sound settings of your computer, or settings in an application. And then the next step from that point is we need an application that transmits audio when it sends and receives audio. Zoom, I want to kind of talk a little bit about Zoom because this is the one that we know so well, and I just want to use that as an example. What Zoom does in the settings, you can direct the information that your microphone captures into Zoom within the Zoom settings. So it has sockets, just like any other application that uses audio has sockets for microphones and for speaker devices. It's the same for Skype. So if you want specific device to be used for specific application, you go into settings and you change those. The next step with the transmission of sound, transmission of information, is the local network, is the connection between your computer and the modem. From then, I'll continue on. From then, the modem sends the information out through the internet, usually some kind of server in the middle, but that we don't really have control over, then comes out, goes to another modem, which then goes to the computer, which uses the same kind of conversion, and then comes out of a speaker. Yes. The troubleshooting part of it, this is where I think this is where all the difficulties come in. When something doesn't work, where do we look at when things don't work? When troubleshooting, say your device doesn't work, the places to look at are the device itself. Is it turned on? Is it functioning? Is it broken? Not broken? Or is the driver installed? If it's not, you go to the manufacturer of your device and look for the driver for that specific device. Make sure that it's compatible with your computer. That could also happen. I plugged in a mixer into my Windows machine the other day and it wouldn't work. And it was because the drivers were incompatible. Um, the system settings to look at whether your computer is set to be using that device or not. And then application settings. You go into and make sure that it's set to be using that. If your connection speed is not good, or if your consistency of, let's say, we are using Zoom, is inconsistent or choppy and whatnot, that has to do with um, connection between computer to modem, modem through internet to that middle part of the connection, and that's yes, we don't necessarily have control over how fast the speed of the internet is, even though we could pay for a lot of it, but um, they're still traveling and stopping points along the way between modem to modem. And um, and the biggest change actually that we can make at home is to connect via a cable. Um, it's that will make the most noticeable change. Wi-Fi is not as consistent as a cable connection, as an Ethernet connection, and the modems these days I think come with both, and so you should be able to connect it, through a wire, and it's a cheaper solution that way. If you were to buy, I know most laptops don't come with an Ethernet port anymore, but if you were to buy a little adapter and an Ethernet cable, it's a cheaper solution than to pay for a lot more internet, which won't give you as much result. So consistency of Zoom and consistency of transmission, that has to do with you can make a bigger difference in your local network, the way your computer is connected to the modem. For music making, the biggest, uh, in Zoom especially, there's lots of extra processing, and Zoom is trying to really be helpful because it's optimized for verbal communication. It's not optimized for music making. So then it changes the microphone volume on its own. It cancels everything that's below a certain volume, which is horrible for us because if we're playing piano, for example, the attack is heard and some of the decay is heard, and after that, at some point, it just gets cut off, and so you don't get a you don't. I mean, we've all dealt with this kind of thing where it sounds super choppy, doesn't sound natural at all, and it's because Zoom thinks it's background noise, and echo cancellation is a major issue, and this is actually what their schematic looks like, and in my opinion, it really just should look like this. There's too much processing, too much of all this stuff happening, but it's all in good intention. It should just be this. And the problem that they are trying to solve is is the echo cancellation, is this. So what happens is when you send the sound to Zoom, to modem, to whatever, and then comes out of the other speaker, what then happens is that sound goes back into the receiver's microphone and goes back in, and it's what's called feedback loop. If you've experienced it, it's the most horrifying, disruptive thing ever. It just sounds like a really loud whistle. Um, it's no good. And so they're trying to mitigate for that by having extra processing. And the thing to do actually for us to cancel most of that out is just put on headphones. If we were all to put on headphones, we could all unmute ourselves and have a pretty natural feeling experience on Zoom. It would still might sound like a zoo because of all the background noise, but at least we would be able to not speak into a void, if that makes sense. So in Zoom, turn off all the extra processing and put on headphones. And it's a PSA upgrade. Oh, not upgrade. Download and install the latest update of Zoom because it's pretty wonderful. They have a new high fidelity music setting where if you plug in your headphones, the sound is so much more natural and it's so much better. So Zoom, there's hope. But for latency, there's not, unfortunately. So latency is something that we need to discuss going into playing in sync. So latency is the time it takes for. Can you guys see my cursor? Yes. Okay. Cool. So the time it takes for the sound that generates here to enter this microphone and exit out of these headphones. So that's what's called latency. For our purposes, I mean, there's more to it, but for our purposes, that's the thing. It's the time it takes from here to here. And every step of the way on this chain, there's potential for things to slow down. There's processing that, when the analog signal enters a computer, there's processing that turns it into a digital signal. That takes a long time. And then from here to across the internet to then being converted out, that all takes a long time. So we need applications that handle audio with very low latency. And unfortunately, unfortunately, it's not Zoom. In comes applications that are based on Jack Audio Connection Kit, which is what Jack stands for. And the Jack in Jack Audio Connection Kit stands for Jack. Anyway, it's very brainy and awesome kind of thing. And it handles audio on a very low latency and is able to transmit and receive audio and basically make what we just showed you possible. I'll pass this to Kim now, who's going to talk a bit about SoundJack.
Yes, without such fancy arrows, unfortunately, but still, we will talk about SoundJack. So there are a couple of different ways of using the technology that are to differing degrees more or less friendly. And SoundJack is, I think, definitely the friendlier and more accessible of the two. I think the links, if you want to download it, the links were included in the information about this. But also, you can just go to soundjack.eu, not edu, EU, and you'll get to the website, which requires you to create an account and confirm it and all of that business. And then once you've done that and logged in, you'll get to a page that looks something like this by clicking on the stage. What you should know is that you have to open the app that you download before you open the stage. Otherwise, it won't load, and it'll look like nothing's going on. Because no other window pops up when it's running, when it's open. It just is sort of running in the background. But that's open first, and then you come to SoundJack and go to the stage, and this comes along. And basically, you're ready to go. There are a couple of things over here. This is for the incoming sound. In other words, what mic you're using. And if not, then you just choose the built-in. And this is for the outgoing sound, which again, if you could just choose headphones or built-in device or something. You do generally want to slide this slider over because otherwise you will hear yourself in your headphones, which for me is just a little disorienting. But other than that, it's pretty much ready to go. You would click here to connect with whatever person you want to. If I were wanting to make music with Riley Vogel, I would click here and that would send an invitation, and then they would accept and we'd be off to the races. We are finding that a lot more people are using this now, so sometimes there's fairly high traffic, and so you might have to try a couple of different times for it to load, basically so that there's an open spot on the stage. But it's fairly reliable, and again, in terms of setup, it's definitely the friendlier of the options that we're going to talk about today. Again, like Aram mentioned before, the two best things that you can do to work towards success on this is have an Ethernet connection and use headphones. I think probably between us, we'll probably say 70 umpty times today, use an Ethernet cable. But it's real, it's true, that really helps. So that's SoundJack in a nutshell.
I think John Gibson would like to pop in briefly.
Sure. You're muted.
I think you're muted.
Good, thanks. This may be a little premature, so you can shut me down. But I was just curious, since you've talked about sound jack and also jack trip, and from my understanding, sound jack means that your traffic is going through an intermediate server. Is that correct? I don't know if that's true, but I'm
I can
just
take that.
curious, between those two approaches, which have you found to be the most reliable or the lowest latency?
Um, Aram, you'll know more about the sort of workings, the inner workings of it.
I think there is definitely a middleman involved in SoundJack for sure. Because when you connect through Jack Trip, one of the nodes serves as works as a server, the other one works as a client. So then the connection's direct. In fact, I'm gonna kind of talk about that in a little bit. I think no, I mean actually the question is very appropriate because I wasn't really gonna address that, but yeah.
And SoundJack sometimes has another 5 or 10 milliseconds of latency, which if it's on the cusp, that could make the difference. But generally, again, with that good old cable, it really doesn't make too terribly much difference. I do think that once we're connected, once a person is comfortable working with Jack Trip, then it's probably the difference is enough better to be worth it. But the getting there is a bit bumpy sometimes.
No, I'd
So,
definitely say it's more accessible.
yeah.
SoundJack's definitely more accessible.
Do you want to go on with Jack Trip?
Yes, sure, sure. Okay, hope I'll try and keep this short, but it's for those who are interested in using Jacktrip, I'm just gonna talk about how to set that up. And it'll take a minute. I hope not too long. And if you're bored, stop me and I'll answer questions. So I just want to one of the things that made a kind of actually a big difference was our setup. We tried on Windows and it wouldn't work. At least um, my Windows machine is a little bit older, so maybe a newer one would work better, but certainly not the same as a Mac or Linux machine for that matter. So I was running an iMac on the latest uh, operating system. I had an interface and a couple of condenser mics plus a line input, so it was always kind of high tech, but it didn't have to be that way because Kim's got what she had what she's using right now, which is a Yeti mic and just an Apple laptop. With and both of us are connected via Ethernet, and both of us were using headphones. I think at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, you were using 100 megabit internet or something slower. So it wasn't a speed wasn't a big issue. Would you say? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
So it's the speed of the internet wasn't an issue. I think the transmission rate is usually the more of an issue. How many packets per period, and that kind of thing. So there's a couple of steps in getting to the point where we were able to just run the thing. So we had to download a couple of programs. We had to configure them, and then the running of it. I'll I'll, I'll try and explain all of that. So there's in the email there were links to both of these downloadable files. You download and install these. One of them's uh, the jack audio connection kit that runs in the background, and it also comes. And then there's also an application called Jacktrip, which is a terminal application which you run by typing code. And I mean, not a lot of code to type, but there's not really a what you call it. There's not a face to that application. You actually use that to connect to computers across the internet. So that's what Jacktrip is. But the Jack OS X is the connection from that routes everything. And there is a what do you call it there is a face to that program, and it's called QJack Control. So when you're installing this, you'll get a couple of security warnings because these were open source programs, and Apple doesn't trust them immediately. You'll be asked to restart your computer, restart after both installations. I think you want to install Jack OS X first, and then jack trip. But just to be safe, restart your computer after both. Um, and then once you do, you'll need to configure a couple of things. You'll need to configure the applications that you just installed, and then you also need to configure your internet router. So this is what the application looks like. It's quite, it's very innocent looking kind of thing. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. So what the thing to configure is within the settings. And these need to be, for our purposes, do this exact thing for now. This, by default, does not come in typed. That needs to be typed exactly as is. /usr/local/bin/jackd, and it's a path to a file that runs once this application is started. The driver for audio needs to be changed to Core Audio. It doesn't come by default. Core Audio is what works with Macs. For Windows, it's something else, but again, more trouble than it's worth. For interface, you get to use whatever audio device you have, and instead of clicking that drop-down menu, you click the arrow, because the drop-down menu opens a bunch of computerese things, and only those people understand that. The arrow opens up a window that actually looks more human. Frames per period, that's the rate at which you're sending information. This one's set to 128 frames per period of sending, and the sample rate for the audio samples, we had set at 44.1. But the important thing to remember is that these two settings need to be the same between the two computers that are getting connected. And you can change those according to what your internet speed can handle, what your internet connection and your computer, for that matter, can handle. So lower sampling rates could make for less latency, but way worse audio reproduction. For frames per period, the lower the number, the faster the transmission, but it could it could overload your CPU, and your internet connection as well. So you kind of want to mess with it and find the sweet spot. For Kim and I, this worked, and I imagine for most people this would work wonderfully. Let's see, configuring farther. Yeah, okay, so after you've set those up, you test it. You push the start button, and if it runs, wonderful, and it'll ask you to give it permission to use the microphones. Please give it all the permissions it asks. It's not a virus, I promise. And then before next step, connect your computer to your internet box via Ethernet and turn off Wi-Fi. This is important because on a Mac computer, Wi-Fi and Ethernet, they interfere. If your Wi-Fi is on and the Ethernet's on, they don't like each other. You got to turn one of them off. You've done that, so then you have to do this, which is harder to explain, and it's a little bit, yeah. So you have to set up what's called port forwarding, which for those who remember what call forwarding was, it's the same. So one computer calls the other computer, and no, let me say the other way around. One computer uses the modem to call another computer using that modem, and the computer says, well, if this computer calls through the port 4464, send it to me directly. Your modem at the moment probably has a number of devices connected to it, and it needs to know which device to send that call to. And so you have to go to your modem settings, and the thing is that it's actually each modem, each router has different settings, and so you have to just go to Google and search for port forwarding for your specific router. So, and yeah, and the nice thing about it is that only one of the computers needs to do this, which means that if you're somebody that a lot of people collaborate with, you can set it up for yourself and then have people call you, and they don't have to do it themselves. So you have to set it, like that's what I think Kim and I have both done, is we have port forwarding set up for us, and then we're able to be the server node in this connection. And the port that needs to be forwarded to the computer is 4464. That's the default port that Jacktrip works on. the next thing that you need is your IP address. If you're the person that's setting up port forwarding, you need to know your phone number basically. And your IP address, a public IP address, it's called IPv4, which is an older version. IPv6 has all sorts of gibberish. We don't need that. We need IPv4, which is 4 sets of 2 to 3 digit numbers. And I've covered this here because it's not entirely all that safe to just give these out in public. But I mean, if you trust somebody, great. So here's how this all works. That's all the setup. Running the thing, so you start your QJack control, and it's abbreviated QJack CTL is what it's called. You start your QJack control, then you open a terminal. I'll show you. So here's back to where we started. The 2 screens. Up above it is mine. Next to it is Kim's. So I'm running as a server. So I start my QJack control module. I start the thing. I push start on it. So it's running. And I open a terminal window and I type jack trip space -s. And that starts a connection. That looks like this. And notice right here, it says waiting for a connection. I don't know if that's clear enough, but it says waiting for a connection from client. Kim, on her end, starts QJack control, opens a terminal, types in she types jacktrip space -c space my IP address. When she pushes enter, both of us get this message, received connection from peer, received connection from peer. And that's it. So, who has questions? I mean, after that point, you hear each other, you know, hopefully if everything went right, you hear each other with as low as latency as you can think of, or you can muster, and communicate in real time. So yeah.
So is the experience pretty similar to like playing with someone in the room next to you?
I'd say so. Yes, definitely.
Okay, that's amazing.
So I'll actually have like a bit of a reference too. So if you think of the speed of sound, which is about 1.12 feet per millisecond, sorry. So we're measuring latency, the distance, or like the time between, you know, when I play and Kim hears it, we measure it in milliseconds. And so long as it's within like 20 to 30 milliseconds, it's just like being 20 to 30 feet away from each other. Except, see, when you're in real life, when you're 20 to 30 feet away from somebody, you get lots of reverberation. You don't get all the sound coming to you because it decays by the time it gets to you. In Jack Trip, you don't get any of that. The sound gets to you as if you were right there. So yes, it's 30 to 30 feet away without extra, without the reverberation, without the decay. And then it's not always just 30. It's actually sometimes quite less than that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what we frequently will do is to set up another device, which might be on Wi-Fi, with a video of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. Zoom or Jitsi or FaceTime or whatever, and then just mute that one, so that, I mean, you can't use it like for cueing each other, mm-hmm. right? Because the video is always slightly behind the audio. But as a teacher, it's helpful for diagnosing, right? If somebody makes a funny noise, then I can look at them and be like, oh, that's what you're doing with your tongue or whatever. And it's also just nice to like remember it's a human connection, you know, mm-hmm. to have another face. But the video and the sound won't be in sync.
Mm-hmm. John.
And so when you have that, you have another device for video, did you say? A separate device?
Yeah, maybe like on my phone or...
So you don't try to run that on the same computer that you're using for the sound?
Well, you can. I'll tell you one more. So we, as an experiment, set up a couple of rooms in MA building, which they both run Macs and got the whole setup that they connect over Jack Trip. And for the collab majors, they are able to run both the audio connection with Jack Trip and open a Jitsi feed where, if anybody's not familiar, it's like a video connection, just on the same machine and mute the other. And yeah, we've done it too. Well, I mean, I've always just been running the same on the same machine. I think Kim's more adventurous.
Part of it is because if um, it didn't, we weren't really able to connect the first time or the second time or the 12th time or the 20th. Like it has gotten to where we're able to do it, but it took a long time, and it seemed like generally things were more stable the fewer businesses that I had running at the same time on my computer. This is that's Jitsi that Aram was just talking about, and it's kind of Zoom-like, except it's not near as heavy. Like it doesn't take near as much oomph.
And then no memberships, nothing. It's just very easy to just make a video conference, start a video conference, and then invite people. And all they have to do is just click a button or click a link.
I think a student emailed a question to us earlier today. His question was, will these programs work as well on PC or PC to Mac?
Theoretically, yes. I mean, the PC version of it exists. It looks like David's got an answer for it. Please.
Yes, I've played with Jack Trip before. I've managed to establish a connection between two computers in my house, from upstairs and downstairs, using a PC. I took the entire Stanford course on Jack Trip. I sat through I don't know how many sessions on that, and finally managed to make it work. I'm a choral singer, so my final analysis was this isn't going to work with 40 members trying to do something. It's more of a one and two, two people collaborating situation that's going to work best on. I'm also limited by, I can plug into Ethernet cables in my house, but when I go onto the actual outside internet, I'm using the AT&T cellular network, so I'm using a cell phone basically. So I gave up on that. I figured that was never going to have low enough latency to work. You did a pretty good job of explaining things. I agree with most of your statements there. I'm a physicist by training, so I've got a little advantage on some things. I was most interested in how Sound Jack differed from Jack Trip, is why I got on board. I'm also a singer with Bloomington Chamber Singers, for those of you know. And hi, Ann, from St. Thomas.
No, I mean, and anything, I'd appreciate any more insight, to be honest, like, because, I mean, I'd say, yeah, I've always been fascinated with computers and always kind of dug in farther than your average consumer. But I mean, like any insight you could offer us, I tried to sit through the CCRM stuff,
Yeah.
but the thing is that, like, I think I had better luck just exploring on my own, because I don't know. It's recording, so I won't say what I thought about it, but it just confused me more than it helped at the time.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm very I can sit through anything, so I managed to get all the way through it. It was interesting and a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I'm glad I did it. I don't think it's going to work for my application for choral singing, but for very small groups. The other thing I noticed from the course, that they seem to be using it mostly for more improvisational jazz type of things, where it's not quite the same as doing a classical performance somewhere. But for two people, or maybe even three people, it would work. The more people you add to it, the more bandwidth you need, and the latency problems are going to go by. You're always going through a server somewhere, and if you go out on the World Wide Web somewhere, you're probably going through several servers to get there. So there's always this intermediate network thing that you're trying to reduce the latency of. But I say you did a good job of going through what you learned. I learned about the same thing by going through the entire course.
I appreciate that. Thanks for saying that.
But I do think it's probably easier on a Mac. To me, a Mac is completely non-intuitive, so I do okay with the PC. I did use a Mac at work for a couple of years, so it's not that I've never tried it, but I just think like a PC, I guess. And it will work. Jack Trip will work on a PC if you hang in there and do all the steps that you said.
Thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful.
I'm part of a trio that's horn and soprano and piano, and the other 2/3 of the trio live in Albuquerque, and they're married, so they're in the same place. And we're actually doing a chamber concert because Aram is the magician that is getting all of this to happen. We're doing a chamber concert next Wednesday, and it is. I think it's pretty functional because they're the 2/3 of the sound is coming as one thing,
Mhm.
right? I think if we were in three different places,
Yeah,
that
it'd
might
certainly
be a
be a little
little
bit more
bit
variable.
dicier.
It worked for Stanford. They had things going on between more than two places.
Hmm.
More, you have more channels you have to work with instead of a two-channel situation. You got to have four or eight or whatever, and that adds a lot to the complexity.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I'm not sure I could. I did this once with my daughter up downstairs and me upstairs. I don't think I could go to my other computer and sit down and make a connection right away. It would take me another week to figure out how to make it happen again.
Hmm.
But if
Well,
you're
Ram,
doing,
you've
it's like
Go ahead.
anything else. If you're doing it all the time, it becomes easy.
right.
Hmm.
Ram had figured out. You had figured out how to. You have figured out. That's how we're doing it, right? To connect the both of our places of music are connecting to you as a
Oh, you
third.
mean, oh yes. So what's happening is the in order to connect more than one person or more than one-on-one, the server node has to open two connections on different ports. So that's adding to complexity. So
Mm.
I'm able to open 4464 and 4474 on separate using separate terminal windows, and then they both connect to me, and I'm able to from the QJack control module, I'm able to route their sound to each other and then to a streaming device.
Hmm.
So they're able to hear each other, and then I'm also able to use whatever I get from them to then use it in a live stream.
Right.
And we also use we use Zoom actually for video.
So Kim, that's amazing that you're doing a concert with Jack Trip. So I'm curious how your streaming setup. I'm assuming you're live streaming it. Can you explain a little bit more how your streaming setup looks like with microphones and the cameras and everything? How many
Well,
applications you have going on?
it's a hot mess, is what it is. You should see all the cables in the corner of my room. It's tangly, um, and again, it's because Aram is a fantastic geekhead, which I say with much
Oh, that's very
endearment.
accurate. The
The
geekhead part.
the so Mike and Katie, they have a camera and a couple of um, tablets that are running the video part, and then those send to Aram by Zoom and by Jack Trip. And then I have my just computer camera and theoretically an interface with some mics attached to it, and that all goes to Aram the same way. And then you're running it through OBS, right?
Yes, I'm using OBS to get the video from Zoom and the audio from Jacktrip to
And
combine and then live stream.
it's able to slow or not slow it down, but to make the video
Yeah,
and the
I'm able to drift the video, or yeah, drift both so that they line up as they're sent out.
Wow. So
Mhm.
you manually drift them,
Actually,
or
like you just type a couple of numbers. Like there's you can offset it by a certain number of
I
milliseconds,
see.
and so then like it makes up for it.
That's fascinating.
Mhm.
That's
and
very
then
cool.
OBS is what streams it to YouTube.
Yes. All of this is, by the way, open source. Like none of it costs money, which is really awesome to me.
Yeah.
I have a question. Mrs. H is also has the same question because we just talked about this yesterday. As far as like using this in a lesson, if suppose that there were three people in the lesson. There's the teacher, singer, pianist, all in different locations. Everyone would have to be on sound jack in order to hear, or jack trip, whatever we chose to use, would have to be on that platform and connected in order to hear what was going on, right?
That's accurate. Yeah.
That's
So
correct.
for SoundJack, um, it's a little bit simpler. Again, everything's a little bit simpler on there. So what needs to happen is each of the members needs to call the other two members.
Okay.
So like you call your pianist and you call your teacher. Your teacher calls. So then those connections are established. Then the pianist or the teacher calls the pianist. So then there's a
Right. So everybody has to call the other two people
yes.
who are involved. Okay.
Is that, it's kind of right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. So you'd said that potentially having more people hooked up does that make it slower if you have more people, or does it not really matter?
You know, actually, the thing that's a little bit, well, for one, I'll say we have limited experience with doing that. So
Okay.
like we've only done it actually three people. But the thing is, then the delay is varied.
Okay.
The connection from one to the other may be at 20 milliseconds, and then from one to the other, maybe 30 milliseconds. And then
Okay, so it's not necessarily, it has more to do with the individual internet speeds and not so much like the more people involved, the slower it gets. Like for some reason that's in my brain that like the more
I think
people are on.
David might have a good answer for this. No, I mean, you got a good point, except I actually don't know the science behind it. I imagine it would, yes, but
Okay.
uh,
We'll try, we're gonna try it, so.
please do. I mean, and I want to hear about it too. Like,
Okay.
actually, I'd love to. And if you need someone to test with, please, like that.
Yeah, well, and Andrew Folker is my pianist, so
Perfect.
he's been in touch with you, and yeah, we're
Yes,
on
he
it.
has. Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about now.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, there is a way, if you were to use Jack Trip, to have just you and your pianist being on Jack Trip, and one of you would send that combined information to your teacher using Zoom. There is a way to do that. It's just complicated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll try SoundJack first and
Okay.
see if we can all get on SoundJack.
Mhm.
And if that doesn't work, maybe we'll try the more complicated thing.
Sounds good.
I think we're coming up, actually, we're a little bit over time, but if there are any last questions, now's the time to ask them. If not, we'll give Aram and Kim a big thank you for donating so much of their time and expertise to us. Thank you for being here and for sharing with us and for paving the way in the virtual music collaboration. All right, thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend, great rest of your Friday.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.